Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so with our screencast today, we're going to start taking a look at credit and how credit can affect your life in a positive way, a negative way, and all the different types of credit that are out there. So I think when we think of credit, we always think of credit cards, and we don't think of a lot of other ways that are actually buying something on credit. And so that's, I think, the first kind of important concept to understand. Credit is not just a credit card. Yes, that's one form of buying on credit, but there's a lot of other ways of buying on credit. So what does it mean to kind of buy something on credit? Essentially what it means is you're buying something with money that you don't currently have. So essentially, in a lot of ways, you're taking a loan either from a credit card company or from a bank in order to purchase something with somebody else's money, essentially, and you're paying back that person that has loaned you the money, and that's buying something on credit. And so, like, when you look at these examples here, what I would do is just maybe pause the video here, take a look at these different scenarios, these different types of buying on credit, and what you want to think about is this a good use of buying on credit, or is this a bad use of buying on credit? Because it's good and it's bad. It's not always negative. It's not always positive. Some types of buying on credit are actually helpful to you. Some types of buying on credit are actually harmful to you. So what I would do is kind of pause the video, take a look at them, and see like which ones do you kind of determine to be a positive use of buying on credit, which do you kind of see as a negative use of buying on credit. Okay, so like I said, there are positives and negatives to buying on credit, which kind of relates to good debt and bad debt. So like when you buy something on credit, you are going into debt because now you owe that money to a third party. And so like there's good forms of debt and there's bad forms of debt. So like what makes something a good form of debt or a bad form of debt? Good debt essentially has the potential to grow your wealth. And it's more of like an investment in your future. It's an investment in your own wealth. That is something that I would consider to be good debt. Bad debt is buying things that potentially are kind of unnecessary, that essentially don't really add any value or add any wealth to your portfolio. Essentially, they might be luxury purchases, or purchases that are not well thought out, that are made in like the spur of the moment. So if you look here and you look at these, some of these are clearly forms of good debt because they are going to potentially increase your wealth, or they're necessities for you. And so like potentially you might look at this as a need, and you kind of can go into debt for this. And some of these are definitely not. So when you look at like the first one is definitely a good example of good debt, because buying a house essentially with a mortgage, which we don't think of as buying on credit, but it's a loan, and therefore you are buying something with money that you don't have. Essentially, this is a good form of debt because, as we talked about the other day, homes accrue in value. They increase in value over time. And so therefore, that's a good use of buying something on credit, or going into debt. One that maybe is not is, let's say this one. Simon puts a new flat screen TV on his credit card for the upcoming Super Bowl. So essentially that's not really a good form of debt. That's more of an impulse purchase. The Super Bowl is coming up. You may be having a Super Bowl party. That's not really a good form of going into debt. That's maybe a situation where if you don't have the money, you shouldn't make the purchase. And so like there's good ways to kind of use credit, and there's poor ways to use credit. And it's important to kind of understand both aspects of it, because buying something on credit and buying something on debt is not always a good thing, but it's not always a bad thing. Now, as far as types of credit that are out there, so there's different types of credit, and they correlate with some of the examples that I gave you kind of in the opening there. So when you look at different ways to buy things on credit, first one is something called single payment credit. So this is when items and services are paid for in a single payment within a given time period after the purchase. So interest is not usually charged on this. So this is kind of like you're paying something off in a single payment. It's due by a certain date, and so therefore they usually don't charge you in that interim of potentially, they don't charge you in that interim between when the payment is due and when you purchase it, there's no really interest kind of accrued there. So like you could say to a certain extent, if you pay your credit cards on time, it's kind of like a form of single payment credit. But it's more of a different type of credit that we're going to kind of take a look at later called revolving credit. Another form of credit is something called installment credit. So this is when merchandise and services are paid for in 2 or more regularly scheduled payments of a set amount. And so interest is included. So a repayment plan is drawn up in the form of a conditional sales contract based upon fulfilling a number of conditions of the contract. So essentially, this is when you kind of are buying something in installments. So you see this a lot when you buy like products through like a television commercial, and they'll say like, well, in 4 easy payments, you can pay for X, Y, and Z product. And so like you see that on infomercials, you might see that on the internet. They offer you like buying things on installment or buying things over regular scheduled payments. So essentially what they're doing is they're taking the full cost of an item and they're spreading it out over time, and they're charging you extra actually because they include interest in the price of what you're paying. Okay, so that's an installment form of credit. All right, so loan. So this is one of the more common ones that you're going to come across. So money can be loaned out for a lot of different purposes. And so like this is usually done through a financial institution like a bank, but there's also private lending companies that offer loans. So essentially, you're going to pay this back in regularly scheduled payments with interest built into the system, and you kind of know that interest kind of up front. Now, the money could be loaned out for a business loan, for buying or leasing a car, for a home, for a lot of different purchases. They offer these kind of consumer loans. Now, the interest rate and other factors are determined by the bank and by your record as far as like your credit score and your record as somebody who is trustworthy or not trustworthy as far as somebody to loan money to. But essentially, so this is a form of credit and one that a lot of you will kind of experience at some point in your life, taking a loan for some kind of purchase, whether it's a big purchase like a home or a smaller purchase like a car. But a lot of you will kind of be in the position where you will take a loan at some point in your life. All right, the last form of credit is something called revolving credit. So revolving credit is kind of how credit cards work. So you can buy many items using your plan as the total amount does not go over the credit user's assigned dollar limit. So like when you sign up for a credit card, you'll be given like a limit as far as how much purchases you can make on that credit card within a given period of time. And you have to kind of make those payments over at a certain due date. Now, one of the interesting things about credit cards you want to kind of be careful about. On credit cards, when you get your credit card bill, they always kind of give you 2 options. They give you the pay in full option. So let's say you made a bunch of purchases on your credit card over the month. They'll give you like the full amount due, and they'll also give you the minimum payment due. Now, a lot of people fall into a trap, and what they'll do is they'll pay the minimum payment on their credit card, and what that does is it takes the remaining balance and it rolls it over into the next credit period. But what they're going to do is they're going to charge you significant interest on the remaining balance, and so that really gets people into a lot of credit card debt because it's easy to just make that minimum payment and carry over the principal to the next month. What happens is you keep carrying the principal over, the interest on it starts to grow, and the interest rate actually starts to grow with credit card companies as well. And so people can really get themselves stuck in a terrible situation where they're just paying the interest and they can never pay off the principal. And so like they have this like looming credit card debt that they have. So that's just kind of like a brief overview of credit in general, like what it is, different kinds of debt, and the different kinds of credit payments that you might end up making at some point in your life. So our next screencast is going to go into some more detail about credit scores, how you achieve or how you get your credit score, what that means, and a little bit more kind of in depth about comparing different types of debt and like what's happening in America, how much debt are Americans in as a country. So some really interesting facts and kind of statistics we're going to take a look at. All right, so our next screencast again will also be on credit, so look for that later in the week.